I'm very glad to see so many of you joining us here. My name is Naama Sadovsky. I'm the manager of the programs department here at Mishkenot She'ananim. And I'm very glad to have רויא Xhakakian and רובי Nmder here with us today. I will begin with a few words in Hebrew first, and then we will continue our meeting in English. אז כמה מילים בעברית. אני מאוד שמחה בימים המאוד לא פשוטים הללו לארח אצלנו במרחב הווירטואלי של משכנות שאננים את המפגש המיוחד הזה, ולראות כאן את כולכם שהצטרפתם אלינו לשיחה, שבסיומה תיפתח גם לשאלות שלכם. בצ'אט מופיע קישור לקבוצות הוואטסאפ השקטות שלנו, שתוכלו להמשיך ולעקוב אחר האירועים הקרובים בזום, שבתקווה ישובו בקרוב להיות מפגשים פיזיים בבניין ההיסטורי והיפהפה שלנו בירושלים. בעקבות המפגש היום, צפויים מפגשים נוספים על איראן בגוף ראשון עם יוצרים או על יוצרים שמוצאה מאיראן, ובזמנכם אתם גם מוזמנים להיכנס לצפות באתר היוטיוב שלנו, בהקלטה של מפגש שהתקיים אצלנו בפסטיבל הסופרים הבינלאומי בשנה שעברה, עם פיאם פיילי, סופר ומשורר איראני שנמלט ב-2015 לישראל. אז בחזרה למפגש הערב, בשנת 2022 יצא לאור בישראל תרגום לספרה של רויא חקאקיאן, מסע מארץ לא, בתרגומו של תומר בן אהרון. רויא ילידת טהרן, שב-1984 היגרה עם משפחתה לארצות הברית, ובספר היא פותחת צוהר להוויית החיים המורכבת של איראן בתקופת המהפכה האסלאמית. בפתיחה המרתקת לספר, רויא מתארת את תהליך הכתיבה של הספר הזה כמהלך שכנגד הצורך הראשוני והעמוק לשתוק, ואני אצטט את השורות האלה בלשונה כי הן כל כך יפות. אם היית פליטה, אם השארת מאחור את כל אהבותייך ורכושך, הזיכרונות הופכים להיות הרכוש שלך. תמונות מהעבר, קטעים משיחות ישנות, מרהטים את העולם שבמוחך. כשאין עוד על מה לשמור, את שומרת על הזיכרונות. את שומרת עליהם בשתיקתך. אינך חושפת את אוצרותייך לאור, פן תקהה החשיפה את חדות הפרטים. בסוגריים מוסיפה הלקח החשוב ביותר שלמדתי מביקורים במוזיאונים. אז בהמשך היא מספרת על התהליך שבסופו של דבר עורר בה צורך עמוק לא פחות מלשתוק לספר, ואנחנו כאן בשביל הסיפור הזה במילים, הסיפור שהיה חסום ופרץ ככוח שכנגד הלשתוק, ושהוא זה שמאפשר מבט אחר מזה שרואים בחדשות ומבחוץ, מבט שמזקק את האנושי דרך האישי ודרך המעשה האומנותי. ורובי נמדר, שישוחח עם רויא, הוא מחבר הרומן הבית אשר נחרב, זוכה פרס ספיר לשנת 2014, והוא גם דור ראשון בישראל למשפחה מצאצאי הנושאי משהד. כיום רובי מתגורר בניו יורק, הוא מלמד יהדות וספרות עברית, ולפחות ברכה אחת יש בזום שהיא מאפשרת להביא את שניכם אלינו כאן. אז תודה גדולה לכם, רובי ורויא, ותודה גם לליאל וקסמן ולאביב אור משולם על ההפקה של המפגש הזה. ואביב, אם תוכלי לומר כמה מילים על השאלות שבסיומו, וגם על האזעקות שנתפלל שלא יהיו באמצעו, אבל במקרה שכן.
Yes, so hello everybody. I'm so happy to see you all, and especially you, Roya and Ruby. I have to say just something personal, that my father was born in Iran, in Shiraz, so I have my own connection to the subject, and I'm very excited from this meeting. Just one important thing is that in case of an alarm, that's something that can happen, this meeting will be continued. So if you can take your mobile with you and continue and listen to this meeting to the shelter, so that's great. But if not, don't worry. We thought it through and we decided to record this meeting in order for, if something like this happened, we can just send the recording of the meeting to you. And the second point I would like to say is that if you have some questions that pop into your mind during this meeting, so there is a chat room that you can just write your questions either in Hebrew or in English. And Liel and Nama and myself, we will receive the questions, and we will devote some time in the end of the meeting for the questions. I hope that we can answer most of them, that Ruby and Roya can answer most of them. And that's it. So to you, Roya and Ruby, you can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Erev tov lekulam, good evening. It's so wonderful to be here, and I see some familiar faces in the little boxes and many other faces. And Roya, it's wonderful to see you again in this. We're in Jerusalem right now, right? As we speak. And it's amazing to be able to have this conversation in Mishkenot She'ananim, albeit virtual, really one of the most inspiring and wonderful places in the world, an important center of Hebrew, Jewish, and Israeli culture. And it's an honor and pleasure to be here with you. Roya was presented, so I'm not gonna take a long time, but I just want to say a few personal words about Roya and her place in the world and in my world. And so I first met Roya so many years ago in Martha's Vineyard in a reading that you gave at the house in of some Jewish family, yes, and it was your memoir, the journey from the book of No, from the land of No, which has been translated to Hebrew recently, המסע מארץ לא, שתורגם יפה על ידי תומר בן אהרון. And this book has only recently been translated to Hebrew. So for you, it might be old news, but for us Israelis and Hebrew readers, this is like a new and exciting addition to our bookshelf. So you were still young and not, you still are kind of young, to be honest, but you were very, very young, like suspiciously young and very talented. And you read from this book and you were fresh off it was relatively fresh. And the book just came out and your memories were raw. And here we are so many years later. And so much has changed, and yet some things haven't changed. The distance, the double identity, the longing, but also the feeling of maybe it was meant to be that you will be in a different place and write different things than you would have ever written had you stayed in Iran or had stayed in Israel. And we're here in a very loaded moment that feels and could be a really historic, fateful moment. And when the fact that we have to discuss the alarms and people running to the shelter because of the big war with the same regime that made you leave your home, your land, your country, your language, is it's one of those ironies of history. And I think that we are both united in the hope that this will be a new era and a new dawn on this ancient but new country, and on this ancient but new and sometimes complicated and sometimes beautiful relationship between the Jewish people, the Israeli people, and the Iranian people. So before we go to talk about those like big things, can I just ask you on a very personal level, Roya, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What does this do to you?
Well, Erev Tov lekulam. First of all, I'm thrilled to be on with you guys in Jerusalem and with Hebrew speakers, the tribe that I have yet to actually connect with. To go to your question, Ruby, I'm sure you feel the same way. It's a tsunami of feelings. It's not just one thing. It's several different things all at the same time. Over a week ago, when the Supreme Leader was first struck, of course, I was thrilled. I was thrilled not just as an Iranian or a Jew. I was thrilled for the idea that the longest serving dictator in the world had been taken out. And then immediately a feeling of sadness set in, because the next thought, and it came almost a few minutes later, that had they done this just 5 weeks earlier, tens of thousands of people would be alive now. And the idea that such a giant edifice of misery can be so easily removed in the span of a few minutes was both awe-inspiring, but also devastating, because the truth then is that our lives can be so easily reconfigured and made better, hopefully. We don't know the outcome yet, but at least, for the moment, within a span of a few minutes or a few hours. So a lot of things, there's joy, and I don't think this is a moment just for Iranians or Jews to celebrate. This is a moment for anybody who cares about the cause of democracy anywhere in the world to celebrate. But it's also a moment of great sadness to think how many thousands of lives were erased because of this man only a few weeks earlier. And I think it's a moment of anxiety. I don't know what's coming. I don't know where this is leading to. And I think it's actually what's incredibly both uplifting, but also very anxiety provoking about the difference between Iran and Israel. These two people, the Iranians and Israelis, who are supposed to be enemies, are actually standing on the same side of history. Iranians and Israelis are fighting for the same future simultaneously, and yet Israelis have the luxuries of what a responsible government is providing. Israelis have sirens, Israelis have shelters, Israelis have an army that protects them, whereas Iranians have none of those, and the inconvenience, if the inconvenience is the least we can use, of an army that's actually working against them. So it's just a very bizarre, inspiring, but also nerve-wracking moment.
Yeah. I want to go back with you, Roya, to the beginning of your journey, that famous journey from the land of no. And first of all, can you say something about this intriguing title of the book, The Journey from the Land of No, and in Hebrew, Masa Me'eretz Lo. How do you view, what's behind this very poetic, very intriguing title? And then let's talk about your actual journey.
Okay. Well, I think it was a couple of years after I had come to the United States, when I realized that I could sum up my entire adolescence in a single word, which was no. That whatever I wanted to do, the answer was no. And sometimes the answer was no even before I had asked the question or I had made the request. Could I, go out with my friends? No. Could I wear, whatever costume or outfit that I wish? No. And so the whole, I felt that what could really sum up the experience of being a girl, being a Jew in Iran in those particular years was no. And then my own journey was not just a journey out of a country. It was a journey out of the idea that no is the only answer that I could possibly get. It was a rebellion against the answer that my life was supposed to come to accept, and obviously I built a life to reject it, right?
Yeah. And you, is it safe to say that your formative years, your late teens, were all painted by the history right? The big dramatic shift, political, cultural, religious shift in Iran, and the new life you built for yourself in the United States was also an offshoot of this history. It was not a regular immigration story. Do you ever call yourself a refugee? Is this something you would ever say?
I wasn't calling myself a refugee until Trump came to power. You know, I thought I was a naturalized immigrant. But then as soon as he shut down the program that had actually brought me from Vienna, which is where Iranian Jews going to in the 80s and 90s in order to get their asylum cases processed. As soon as he shut it down, and I sat and thought, oops, you know, if I had not become a refugee to the United States in the late 80s and had applied to come to America in, say, 2016, I would never get in because that entire program had been shut down. So then suddenly, you know, I went from a naturalized American citizen to, you know, back to my refugeehood because I thought somebody needs to speak on their behalf. And so here we are. Yeah.
So your memoir describes in very vivid colors, beautifully written, I must say, the experience, which is not only the revolution, but it's a very central experience to the revolution. And I asked you to read a bit of your book that I feel captures so much that strange feeling of time outside of time, of a life and a universe that was hijacked by history and a very twisted sense of history. Would you share with us that beautiful scene of the rooftop? But give us a little context because not all of us remember that crazy night.
Right. So this is actually a central scene because several things are happening. This is from December of 1978, and so Ayatollah Khomeini, who actually was incredibly inventive when it came to coming up with ideas of organizing or initiating acts of civil disobedience. So he was in Neuf-le-Château. It was in the suburbs of Paris, somewhere in exile, and he was sending cassette tapes into Iran. And you know, there are probably, I hope there are people in this crowd who don't know what cassette tapes are, but that's from an era before CDs and, you know, streaming audio services were available. So these cassette tapes were being smuggled into Iran with his sermons and lectures. And so he lived very much as a leader underground through the audio tapes. And so one of the things that the audio tapes were doing, or this clandestine organization was doing throughout Iran, was to organize acts of civil disobedience. And one of them was to get people to go to the rooftops of their homes at the same time at night. So this scene is from 9 p.m. You know, and in December, and I remember that December actually happened to be actually a very warm winter. So it was very important that it was warm because the oil workers in Iran had gone on a strike, and that was a big deal because the oil industry was a very important backbone of the Iranian economy, and the fact that the oil workers were striking meant that the Iranian economy was basically shut down. So one of the slogans that people kept chanting that winter was, you know, "Bekuri cheshme shah zemistunam bahare," which is basically, in Shah's face, our winter is as good as the spring. because it was so warm and balmy. So people were going up to their rooftops on this particular Thursday evening in December. And the idea was actually very simple, which is why it was in a way evil, but very beautiful at the same time. Everything is dark. You were supposed to turn off all the lights everywhere so that everything would be pitch dark. So think of drama, it's completely black. People even threw rocks at the light fixtures in our alley and broke the lights that were on the street. So there were no lights inside homes. There were no lights throughout the alley. And so imagine you go to the rooftop and all there is are these silhouettes of people on the rooftops and this sound of God is great or Allahu Akbar. I should also mention that on October 7th, when the Israeli female hostages were being shoved into vans, and I was hearing the same chants of Allahu Akbar, I was immediately taken back to this moment in 1978 in Tehran. And I felt like, I've heard this before. This sound traveled, all the way from Tehran now to Israel. So this is me on a rooftop on that December, just a few minutes before 9 p.m. And my brothers are already in the United States. So it's me, my mom, and my dad trying to figure out, do we belong here on the rooftop, as a bunch of Jews, or, should we go back down and stay in our apartment and whatever. So I'll read it. At 8:45 p.m., the lights in the homes began to go off one by one. By 8:55 p.m., not even the night was as dark as our neighborhood. All but the heavenly bodies had heeded the Ayatollah's message. Under the full moon, the antennas and the chimneys emanated a silvery glow, enhancing the majesty of the dark. Nothing hung from the clotheslines, not even pins. The neighbors were on balconies and rooftops, even those with no intention to chant. And that was just what the Ayatollah did. He dazzled even his enemies by the power of his spectacles. Darkness had rendered all faces immaterial. The eye could only see the outlines of the crowd, some short, others tall, some hunched, a few seated. Those were the cynics waiting to see if the night would compel them to join. All families were on the rooftops, and my family, I hopped over the dividers between the rooftops and joined my parents. Father was repeating under his breath, "Helen, do you see this? For as long as the eye can see, one stinking mullah can do all this?" To commit what was memorable to mind, Father always needed Mother as a witness. "Shh," she elbowed him. He teased her. "Try to say Allahu Akbar, Helen, or we would risk irking the goyim." Then it goes on to the moment where 9 o'clock finally arrives and people start chanting.
Yeah, so everybody shouted Allahu Akbar.
I didn't, and that's part of the scene, because
And you're not planning to
to
part anytime soon, I think.
No. I mean, I was 12 when I decided not to chant, so I think it's too late for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, it was a very your journey was long but very interesting. You had some very interesting literary adventures. Will you tell us about the second book that got you in serious trouble and made you an enemy of the regime? Tell us a bit.
Made me an enemy of the regime, but also the publishing industry in the United States too, because the memoir came out, and the memoir was doing quite well. The reviews were were good. I mean, I didn't get a whole lot of reviews, but the ones I got were quite positive. And then, immediately I heard from my editor, who wanted me to do the sequel because the memoir stops in Iran, with the family decision to leave. And I didn't say what happens after. I just did the story of 1974 to 1984. And so my editor said, you should do a sequel. And I said, I'm not interested in doing a sequel. And my editor pressed that you're a memoirist. You should continue writing the second part. And I said, I'm a writer. I'm not a memoirist. I can write about anything. And then I immediately realized that, I was being pigeonholed, that I was going to be, the female Middle Easterner who is going to talk about her suffering all the time in every volume. And then suddenly I realized that it's the last thing I should do. So interestingly enough, I moved to this other project, which in a way I thought was a sequel. To me, it was a sequel. It's I mean, I assume you know the story.
Tell us the
Okay.
story.
So it's the story of 4 Iranian Kurdish leaders. I mean, 3 of them are Iranian Kurdish leaders, and one of them is their non-Kurdish friend who travel from Kurdistan and different parts of Europe to Berlin, Germany in September of 1992, because the Social Democratic Party in Europe is having an annual conference. And so these Kurdish leaders are invited to the conference at the invitation of the German Social Democratic Party. And so they're their guests. And they break away from the conference and they come together at a restaurant called Mykonos in Berlin on September 17, 1992. And they're seated at this restaurant having dinner and meeting with various opposition figures from the Iranian diaspora when at around 10 p.m., a few minutes before 10 p.m., Lebanese and Iranian assassins break into the restaurant and shoot them all, shoot everybody who's at the table, about 10 people. And then 3 of them die instantly, and one of them, the 4th one, dies in the hospital a couple of hours later. And so I did think that in a way, this was a sequel to my memoir, because any Iranian who was a dissident or didn't see eye to eye with the regime and left the country was always hounded. And so I thought, if I had been in Germany and I heard that a group of Kurdish leaders were having a meeting and everybody who was interested in the topic was invited to go in and listen, I could have been there. I could have been, one person in the audience, and so that could have been my faith too. And so that's the second book, sort of the story of how this assassination took place and what happened, basically to the prosecutors and the police who investigated this story, because it was very difficult for them to believe that this was an Iranian government plan. And then it took a 4-year trial for this simple fact to be proven that the highest leadership of Iran, starting with the supreme leader, had designed and orchestrated this whole operation. But then the best part was that the verdict was sort of an uplifting verdict. It actually, for the first time, it implicates all of those, the highest leadership of Iran in the assassinations. And that was sort of the high note that I wanted to end on.
Yeah. But then you were blacklisted after this book, right? You got
I
in
think
trouble.
I was blacklisted before, but I was definitely blacklisted after this.
So you could not go back to Iran.
No.
No, because of this book.
No.
Yeah.
But Iran was coming to me.
Yeah, well, hopefully
In
not,
the
not in that way.
Not,
We are
right.
almost nearing the end of our conversation and opening up for questions. I want to ask you about your relationship with Iranian intellectuals in Iran and abroad, and what do you hear from them, and what sense do you get of their mood, the atmosphere, their response to the war, their response to the US, and of course, we are also interested in their response to Israel. So could you give us a certain insider's point of view about how this is viewed amongst Iranians or our kind of Iranians?
I think it's a mixed bag, and the jury is yet out. Because first of all, the internet is shut down in Iran. This is the longest period of internet shutdown in Iran, at least in the last 10 years or so. So there is very little access. Clearly, in the first couple of days when the war began, people were far more supportive and far more excited by the strikes. But as the difficulties and the casualties are mounting, it's becoming far more complex, because it's also the U.S. administration that, with the rise in the price of oil, the decision to, how far to move on with the war keeps changing, right? And these are very terrifying, because the one thing that's incredibly clear is that if the regime gets to survive, Iran will move in the direction of a future North Korea. That the remaining elements from the regime will become even more hardened than they have ever been. So that anxiety, I think, is what's very dominant. But if there is enough persistence on the part of both Israel and the United States to actually force the regime, weaken the regime to the point where the Iranians can return to the streets as they had done in January, then everything can change. Or so I hope, and so do others that I hear from.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they view, we keep saying this is not a war on the Iranian people, this is a war on the regime. Is this like an Israeli-American fantasy, or do you think the Iranians can still see this, or some of them view this as like an effort, at least some of it, to help them liberate themselves?
I think what's very important is that this war came on the heels of the January massacre, and so people were incredibly bitter and felt very abandoned by the international community. So there is that backdrop against which everybody, or at least most fair-minded people who are looking at this, are seeing things. But I think, depending on the what gets hit, what are the casualties, and whether the issue is just destroying Iran's missile capabilities and nuclear facilities or nuclear capabilities, and then forget about the people, or that there is an effort to try to make sure that the people can actually go back to the streets. That will determine how the society will evaluate this in the future. If they're abandoned, if the worry is only to take care of the nukes and the missiles, and then, you know, to hell with what happens to the Iranians, then this is a terrible war for Iranians. The outcome is going to be awful. The regime is going to stay. It will survive, and it will be far worse than it has been. But if there are ways in which the plan is to actually weaken the security forces to the degree that people can take back to the streets, that will really change the judgment about this war.
Yeah. I know we should move to the questions, but I have one last question for you, which might be a tiny bit provocative, but I would like to hear your... there's a lot of complaint amongst the Iranian exile, opposition, and activists, and about what seems to be the indifference of liberal and progressive America to the plight of the Iranians and their non-involvement. We haven't seen a single protest. Nobody speaks about what happens in Iran. It's a non-item for the progressive left. While, for example, what happened in Israel and Gaza and Palestine was the item of the century. Were you surprised by it, shocked by it? What do other Iranian intellectuals feel and say about it?
I can't say that I was not shocked, and I don't think we can bundle up Iranian intellectuals as one group, because depending on whether they're in diaspora or Iran, and depending whether, you know, how ideological they are, you know, there are those on the left who live in diaspora who feel very strongly that, you know, any war against Iran is wrong. You know, Iranians need to rise up on their own, and, you know, American imperialism and, you know, Zionist Israelis shouldn't be involved. But then there are others who have also been outspoken, including the Nobel laureate, the first female Nobel laureate from Iran, Shirin Ebadi, who after the January massacre said, it's very clear to us that without international support, we can never do anything to remove this regime from power. And people in Iran certainly feel far more supportive of the war, or at least initially they did. But I think, again, you know, international community, of course, it doesn't surprise me. But I think in some very delicate, strange, and important, almost miraculous ways, the destiny of the Iranian people and the destiny of Israelis have come to be intertwined, you know, in a way. Both are facing the same enemy, and both cannot live in peace until that enemy is eradicated. So now Iranians are an extension of Israelis, and therefore, you know, you hear nothing from campuses, but because campuses have no sympathy for Israel or anything that extends from Israel. Yeah. So I'm not at all surprised. But
you're not surprised. You didn't expect. You did not expect. You don't even feel betrayed.
No, this is the hypocrisy that I have known for as long as I have been in America. But I think that the only surprising part is that I had an Iranian life that was kind of moving forward on one track on the right, and I had a Jewish life that was always moving on the left on its own track. And what the surprise for me is that after, you know, decades of these two lives being in parallel, they have now crossed. They've now, these lines that were never supposed to be meeting have met. And I think that's actually the important and surprising and in a way life-changing event, because the two things that we thought had nothing to do with each other have everything to do with each other. And the solution for one can be the solution for the other. And of course, Ruby, if Israel gets it right in Iran, it means that whatever else all the other societies in the Middle East feel, or every other Muslim nation feels about Israel, Israel has won the hearts and minds of Iranians, if it gets it right. And then we can say that Israel has one ally, one solid ally in the Middle East, and it can start to build from there to build goodwill, change sort of the moral arguments against itself from that moment forward. So I think the victory in this war for Israel will be huge, because it would morally justify a lot of things, both for Israel and for Iranians who have been, over the past several years, supportive of Israel because they've been so against the regime and against the regime's propaganda. So getting this right could be a moment from which Israel can build its relationship or its image throughout the region.
I hope so. Getting it right, we're sometimes better at it, sometimes not so much. So I hope that we could get it right once.
Yeah.
Once at least. One last question, because I can. Now we're like here. It's a place of great uncertainty. All the cards are on the table. We have no idea. If you were to bet, like a wild bet from the gut, like from the soul, is Iran going to be soon a free, open society again, return to the family of enlightened nations, overcome this dark era in its history? Do you think it's coming? Do you feel that? Are you hopeful? And my second question on top of it is, will you be running back to visit once this happens, if and when this happens? How you feel about going back?
Okay, so there are several answers. I have to give all of them. I can't just give one of them.
Good.
First of all, it is your job and it's my job. Now, I'm not saying this is a position or a belief. I'm saying it's for you and for me to be hopeful. It's our duty as not just as people who have a connection to Iran, but as thinkers, as visionaries for a better world. It is our job to believe that a better Iran is possible. Because if it isn't, then we are all really screwed. Because if the people who took to the streets a few weeks ago and resisted one of the most brutal armies in the world in the way that they did, and were massacred, if those people have no hope of a better future, then nobody does. So it is for us. It's a mandate for all of us to be hopeful. But the reality tells me that if you have been under the gloomy, dark society that the Ayatollahs built in Iran for almost half a century, there are a lot of things that are lacking from your democratic toolbox that you need in order to build a democracy. So it's not an immediate thing. It will not immediately be democratic, but if there's any society that has the potential to become a democratic society, it's Iran. Because first of all, it has a huge resource. It has a huge gift in one of the most impressive diasporas in history. Millions of hugely successful, educated Iranians outside of Iran, hugely smart, brilliant people inside the country, a great civilization. And you know, a nation that has broken away from theocracy deeply as a result of the experience of the last 47 years. But can it happen immediately? No. But do we all need to be invested in making sure, in whatever way we can, that Iran does make this transition for the sake of Iran, for the sake of Israel, for the sake of the region, and for the sake of all the other nations around the world who are dreaming of a democratic future? Yes, we all owe it to them to be hopeful.
Okay. Thank you very much, Roya. It's always such a
Sure.
pleasure to listen to you. And I'm sure some people would have questions and would love to address the things you talked about. And
I'd like to ask a question. Rouby, how are you feeling?
yeah, that's a good question. I need an hour. Look, I'm in a little different position than you. Iran is for me an imagined homeland. I've never been to Iran. I grew up in Jerusalem. It's like a second tier of identity for me. I do speak Persian and love Persian language and literature, but I learned Persian from my grandmother, so I still sound like somebody's old Jewish grandmother from Mashhad when I speak Persian. So it's been a source of amusement for many
For
Iranians.
me,
But to hear me speak and I sound like somebody's grandma from Khorasan. I live in New York in the Upper West Side, a very liberal, very kind of Democrat, a stronghold. I see that it's only the Jews and the Iranian immigrants that feel this is a great thing. The rest are, because Trump is behind it, the rest are just unable to join this project of helping people who are just like them in Tehran. And it honestly adds to a sense of alienation I've been feeling since October 7th.
yes, we talked
So,
about that, you and me.
yes. And you know, we have already felt that the milieu in which we travel is very flawed and has turned on us in ways and has become very simplistic in thinking and dogmatic and a great disappointment.
Bipolar.
Yes, a great
Yeah.
disappointment. And I must say, it's getting to me, this duality. For some reason, I let it bother me. It bothers me very much. And it's taking over a lot of my life and my professional work, my professional relationships.
Right.
It's suddenly where people
I lost two
say,
sets of friends. One at 9/11, because I had friends who said, you know, U.S. imperialism finally, you know, heard from the global South. And so I cut ties with a group of friends who were supportive then. And then I lost whatever I had left after October 7th. And it just continues. Yeah, it's a very
So
difficult moment.
do you feel that it forced you to redefine yourself politically? Because I cannot walk around and say I become right wing, because I haven't. But I'm most certainly very alienated from the left now. So we're kind of politically and ideologically homeless. That's how I feel.
I continue to be in the left that I was in, and I'm waiting for them to come to where I am standing.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that the left where they are is the real left anymore. So I'm stubbornly waiting in my own corner, and I don't mind being alone. You know, I come from the land of no, so
Yeah.
I'm,
You were alone. You actually were alone all your life in this way.
yeah.
And
It bothered me when I was younger, but then later on, it became material, as I'm sure you know your own
yes.
your own experiences of marginality or difference became your own writing material.
Yeah, I think that no one could produce the work that you produced, this level of sensitivity and even attention to detail if you're so immersed in this collective feeling. In ways, I feel that it does come on account of one's. There's something hypersensitive about people who stand alone, like hypersensitive, almost like a survival instinct. You cannot
Mhm.
ignore a single detail. And even when
Mhm.
you were reading this beautiful paragraph that you read right now, and I said, wow, there's so much perception here.
Mhm.
There's so much perception and so
Mhm.
much attention to the details that evade the eye of the normal people.
Mhm.
And I wonder if it is that sense of eternal exile.
I think so. I mean, uh, I've never really been a religious Jew, but this is how I experience my Jewish identity. I'm in the margins, I'm watching, but being in the margins uh, doesn't really kill me, because
Yeah.
you would think that being uh, sort of isolated or not belonging would grind on the soul, and it does, from time to time. But I feel like there is a whole history, all these other ancestors who stand behind me, and that's much of how I experience my Jewishness.
Yeah. And I asked you a question, and I'm gonna ask it again before we say goodbye.
No,
I
Is
didn't answer.
we have some questions,
No,
sorry.
wait. Oh, we have a question? Okay, so we'll keep my question for the end. בבקשה. Aviv?
Okay, so Oli is asking, how old were you during the revolution and when did you leave? I think you answered it, but you can
Okay.
say it
I
again.
was 12, 12 going on 13, around the year of the revolution. And then I left when I was 18.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I finished high school in Iran.
I have a question from Rivka. I don't know if you can answer it, but Rivka is asking, she say, I have heard that the US President Carter caused the fall of the Shah. Is there any basis for this?
Oh,
I don't think
so
it's
can we blame the fall of the Shah on President Carter? There was a wonderful, wonderful interview with one of my favorite Iran historians, um, who was in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, and he said, the problem with American foreign policy, especially when it comes to Iran, is that they keep looking at Iran but seeing their own reflection. In other words, whatever happens in Iran is their fault. I have been describing that as sort of an American narcissism, which is to say that they feel that they're so important that anything that happens in Iran is their fault. If they take to the streets in 1979, it's because they're angry with 1953. If the elections in Iran go to the so-called hardliners, it's because the American presidents or administration didn't support the reformists enough. But I think all this is a product of people thinking that Americans really are as important and as vital to the decisions that Iranians make all the time, and that is just not the case. Iran is a country with far longer history and civilization than America is, and they have their own agency, their own will, and the idea that what happens in Iran is the result of what Americans do or don't is precisely what the regime has been trying to convince the rest of the world of, because then they become the victims. If President Carter can remove the Shah, then these poor Islamists are not really dangerous people. They're simply victims of the West. And if we are going to change this narrative, we must agree that the Iranian regime, the Iranians are not victims, that what happens to them is the result of their own decisions, their own agency, their own actions to bring about whatever it is that they bring about. The moment we think that it's America who made the Shah go away, or it's America who did X, Y, and Z, and therefore the faith of Iranians changed, is the moment we are basically saying they're all victims, and everything that happens to them is the result of what U.S. imperialism has done. That's just a lie, and that's part of sort of this Islamist narrative that's essential to the justification of all the violence that they've been carrying out. Because it's, they're angry because, they're victims. No, they're angry because they just want to be angry. Maybe bad things have happened to them, but, I always think back, by the way, to the story of Japan, because I think that if the Japanese people, after what happened to them, in 1944, where two giant bombs, most dangerous bombs in human history, were dropped on them, and then they immediately became, or nearly immediately became, one of the chief US allies in the world, could forgive Americans for Nagasaki and Hiroshima, then Iranians can forgive America or Israel or whatever other powers for whatever it is that they think they did to them. That nations don't get stuck in places because somebody did something to them. So we just have to move on for the sake of the truth, from the idea that somebody else is responsible for a major historical shift that happened in their country. It's just the fundamental foundation of the Islamist narrative that we all have to really fight against.
Thank you, Roya. We have another question from Munich. Marina is asking, have you been able to do any writing during these last few days, during these last 2 weeks? How does it affect you on your writing of poetry and for everything? Can you write these days?
Unfortunately, I'm writing what I don't like to write. People make me angry, or say something that upsets me, just like you did now, 1 minute ago. And then I find myself, having to respond to something unreasonable. So I write an essay to, set the record straight. But and every time I finish one of those, I feel like this isn't the kind of writing I want to do. I want to, write something totally different. So yeah, I have been writing, but it's not what I hope or like to write.
Thank you. Okay, another question is it's from Noah Marom. She's asking, in Iran, it's a very big country, over 90 million people. So what do you think? How many of them are against the regime?
It's interesting because everybody is arguing over this. There was an Iran expert last year or so, who a couple of years ago, after the in 2022, when Mahsa Amini, the Kurdish girl, was killed in Iran and the demonstrations in Iran began, one expert published a piece saying, oh, no, there are at least over 30% who support the regime. And then, other people say 10%, and then there's 20%. There's something everybody has to remember, which is that if there was no social media, and so there was less access to the amount of knowledge that we all have access to, and oftentimes I wake up and I wish that I didn't have access to all this knowledge, or I shouldn't say knowledge, but basically information. And part of that information is about the degree of the corruption of the Iranian leadership, the degree of the corruption and hypocrisy that permeates through the Iranian political leadership, including, by the way, the supreme leader, whom we haven't seen yet, right? At least his father actually did fight, was a political dissident, did go to prison, did a lot of fighting and lost a lot in life until after the revolution, when he became a president and then later a supreme leader. But he sacrificed a great deal for his belief system, whereas his son is basically an heir, like any other heir, and he is, he's a corrupt. He's as corrupt as they come. He has $1 billion worth of assets, in real estate and other forms of assets in Europe. So the fact that people have access to this sort of information prevents them from really believing in the narrative that they're selling, that they are representatives of God on the planet, and they're there to, save humanity or Muslims from the hands of the Zionists and the imperialists. There was something just about a few months ago. There was an army general who I think was hit in this last week or last few days, who was responsible in 2022, or one of the leaders who actually carried out the attacks in 2022 on the demonstrators in Iran over the hijab issue, right? Over how women were dressed in Iran. And then immediately there was, a few months ago, there was footage of his own daughter getting married somewhere in Europe, where she had no hijab. In fact, she was dressed in a way that, a good Muslim woman, even without hijab, wouldn't dress like. And they were just, doing stuff that ordinary Iranians would get arrested for at this wedding. So this is my very long-winded way of saying, because there is so much information, because people can see how corrupt and immoral they are, that their ability to sell their narrative about Islam, about their divine rule is completely unbelievable to the public. So do they have a constituency? Yes. I mean, they pay a bunch of people, on a regular basis to support them and to fight for them. So that constituency is there. But by and large, people are not with the regime and haven't been for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Can I ask a question from myself? Are you in touch with the Jewish community in Iran somehow? Do you have some relative there? Can you say something about the Jewish community in Iran?
I don't have any relatives in Iran. The Jewish community asks, they ask their relatives in Israel and the United States not to contact them. That one of the things that the sister of a girlfriend of mine who's still in Tehran did immediately in June after Israel began its attacks was to text her sister in Los Angeles from Tehran to say, don't text us, don't call us. Because one of the things that the regime does is that they confiscate cell phones to check the communications between Jewish community and people outside of Iran, whether Israel or the United States. I think this is the most terrifying moment for the Iranian Jewish community since 1979. I just can't imagine how difficult it must be for them. They're also suffering economically in ways that they weren't before, because first of all, the entire country is suffering economically, but the additional layer for the Iranian Jewish community is that the pretenses at civility that used to exist prior to the June war, all of those things have fallen away. So the same friend that I mentioned, whose sister lives in Iran, has a brother-in-law who owns a few properties in Tehran. And the people who have rented these properties are not Jewish, and they are refusing to pay rent. And part of the reason is that they know he's Jewish, and they know it would be very difficult for a Jewish man to press charges against them for not, for anything. And so it is important to remember that Iran's economy is in a terrible state, and everybody's suffering, but the religious minorities, the Jews and Baha'is, are suffering even more.
I will just take the last question and we'll finish, okay? So Batsheva is asking, are you aware of a person that could lead Iran to a better place, assuming that the regime will fall? Are you aware of anyone that can lead Iran?
I think, I think there are a lot of figures inside Iran who have been in and out of prison many, many times over the past many years. And I am hoping that if there is a break in the amount of violence that they have been experiencing, if there is a moment for them to breathe, that they will emerge and we will all get to know them. I am less worried about that than I'm worried, and I'm more worried about them having that opportunity, the opportunity to get some kind of a reprieve so they can emerge and have the kind of public presentation and dialogue that would then build toward, whatever leadership that is required. There are a lot of people outside of Iran. I'm sure, the Israeli government has been overtly and not so overtly very supportive of the son of the former Shah. All these options exist, but I think the most meaningful ones and authentic ones will be the ones to emerge from inside the country. And I'm hoping that with enough of a breather, we will meet those people and be very impressed by them.
Thank you so much, Roya. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you. Thank you, Roya. Thank you, everybody. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, it was amazing. And we hope for better days and that one day we will all visit Iran as free people, being able to walk the streets of Iran and have peace with everybody and to have quiet days and nicer days. Thank you
Amen.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. Batzlacha.